Wolfpack, what's going on? It's your boy, the Wolf of Roto Street, RotoStreetJournal.com. We breed and feed you fantasy wolves. Thrilled to welcome on for the first time Mr. Bob Condotta, who's covered the Seahawks for 9 years now over at the Seattle Times. Previously covered Washington football for 16 years. So he's been a just genius in the game. We're so excited to pick his brain and learn more about what's going on over there in Seattle. Bob, thank you so much for coming on. How you doing, man?
Sure. Yeah. Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Excited to talk the Seattle Seahawks, especially want to kind of start at the top here from an offensive perspective. The Seahawks don't really have a ton of huge names, but there is a potentially huge key change happening, and that's Brian Schottenheimer, the bane of many fantasy owners' existence, just because he didn't let Russ cook, or so the movement was among us fantasy football owners. He's since been fired and now replaced with the Rams passing game corner, Shane Waldron. Now, I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit, start there, and then we can get into the key specific pieces after. What's like the big picture you're kind of seeing here, though, with this scheme? Should we expect any big changes under Waldron?
Well, yeah, I don't know that it'll be huge changes. Like you'll watch the Seahawks offense and you'll just go, man, that looks so much different than last year. I think a lot of things are going to be more subtle. I think one of the things I think they want to do is play a little bit more up tempo, not necessarily no huddle, but just up tempo. Russell Wilson's always been very good in those kinds of situations, late game, 2-minute kind of things. And so I think there's a desire to try to do that a little bit more, try to just get that a little smoother. They felt like they had some issues, I think, at times last year in some of those settings where maybe they didn't maximize it as much as they should have. And then Waldron comes from the obviously the huge attraction for getting him is that he comes from that Sean McVay offense, which features a lot of pre-snap motion and, a lot of trying to just disguise things at the line of scrimmage, lining up in a lot of different formations, running the same plays out of different formations and different looks and things like that, just kind of trying to create that element of disguise a little bit. And I think those are things that maybe they felt they needed to do a little bit more, do a little bit better than they had done in the past. There's been a lot of talk too about just doing more things to get the ball out of Russ's hands a little bit more quickly, shorter passes and things like that. They tried to do that. I would defend Brian Schottenheimer on this. I think they tried to do that last year. I don't think it was like he never thought about that. He's smarter than that. Everybody was saying in the playoff loss, throw to the tight end more. Well, they threw 7 passes to the tight ends. They just only completed 1 of them. It was more about how they did it than what they did. And so that's sort of, I think, what they're trying to do this year is just, figure out how to do some of these things a little bit better than they had done in the past. So, not so much necessarily reinventing the wheel, but I would argue too, that if you just have Russell throw short all the time, you're taking away what is his best thing, which is throwing deep. And, so that was another thing, they struggled with last year was teams were really playing them, Pete Carroll, pretty frankly, after the season said, a lot of teams just got in, 2 deep zones and tried to take the deep ball away from us. And we need to adjust to that more. But the reality is if you let a team just take away what you do best, you're sort of giving into them too. You still got to figure out how to do that. And when you've got DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who are 2 of the best, deep ball receivers in the NFL, and Russell, who may be the single best deep ball passer in the NFL, you've got to figure out a way to still make those plays happen. So, you're not, this isn't going to be nothing but just dinking and dunking all over the place. But I do think they want to get to where when they feel like that's something they want to do more, the throwing deep, the throwing short stuff, that they do it better than they did it last year.
100% tempo, a big thing after Seattle ranked, I believe it took this right from your article, 19th in the NFL last year at seconds per play, 27.72. They were also 14th in pre-snap motion. So just those 2 little subtle changes could go a long way. Do you think, we'll get into Russell specifically and how he might fit into this system you just mentioned, they are going to continue to hopefully throw it deep, given it's such a big strength of his. Do you think they're going to throw it more often in this offense, or do you think it still will be pretty run heavy as it has been under his tenure with Pete Carroll here?
Well, I guess what qualifies as run heavy. I mean, last year you can find a million different stats if you want, but in sort of play neutral situations, the Seahawks threw it quite a bit. They were pretty high up there, especially early in the year. Part of what happened was they had some injuries on their offensive line. They weren't pass blocking as well the second half of the year because a lot of those guys just weren't there anymore. Their center, Ethan Posick, got hurt, missed a game. their right tackle, Brandon Shell, was in and out of the lineup a little bit. Their guard spot with Mike Iupati, he was an older player who they tried to basically get one more year out of, and it just didn't really work out. So they sort of had some issues like that came to a fore. And when they played some teams early in the year, they were really able to have some success with it. When they played, especially when they got into division games, teams that know them well, especially the Rams, the Rams know how to play them, and it didn't work quite as well. So, Pete wanted to get a little bit more conservative in those games and sort of not lose the game before you go win it. I don't think that philosophy of Pete's is going to change. He turns 70 next month. He sort of is who he is, and it's kind of funny for Pete being, kind of this always compete, look on the bright side of life guy. He's very risk averse when it comes to his football team. His biggest thing, his biggest thing is don't turn the ball over. And so they're always going to want to try to be as careful, win the turnover margin, don't turn the ball over. His number one stated, you can find 8,000 quotes of him saying, his number one philosophy in football is it's all about the ball. And that was the problem, was at midseason, Russell had a span of 4 games where he had 10 turnovers, and they lost the 3 games where he had all the turnovers. And, so they wanted to rein that in a little bit, and they felt like they had to because of where things were with their line and with some of the defenses they were playing. And things like that. So it really wasn't like we just don't want to throw the ball anymore. It was just sort of a bunch of circumstances. Obviously they're hoping their offensive line kind of makes it through this season a little better. Adding Gabe Jackson to that instead of basically he's just going to replace Iupati is really the only change they made. But with that and with as we were discussing earlier, maybe an offense that just is a little bit better, has some more answers on taking, kind of mitigating the pressure that defenses bring and making them maybe not be as aggressive in some situations. That maybe that'll allow for that, but they're always going to continue to run it to a certain extent. And they re-signed Chris Carson in the offseason, and they're going to want to keep using him. And Pete Carroll just believes that's a good way to play. The other thing about it is Russell's a really big part of their running game, and I know that doesn't help from a fantasy perspective maybe at all, but Russell Wilson's one of the 2 or 3 best running quarterbacks I think in the history of the NFL. And so when people say running takes the ball out of Russell's hands, I argue the opposite a lot of times. All those zone replays are Russell being given the option to do what he wants with the ball. So it can look like a handoff, but a lot of times it's not. They're telling Russell, you can run it if you want, or hand it off if that's what you see with the zone read. And he had averaged 6.2 yards per carry or whatever it was last year. I mean, Russell was very effective running, and that's always going to remain a big part of their offense too, is that aspect of the running game.
Yeah, and football, fantasy football owners actually love that when the quarterback runs. They call it the quote Konami code. It's like a cheat code because of how many more points they rack up. I don't know if you play much fantasy yourself, but the rushing points, play. Yeah. We got to get you back into it sometime, man. I'll be happy.
Well, covering the game, it's sort of just, you kind of.
Right. Exactly. In the thick of it. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.